the boom on him, and you have the ace-high flush draw against his king-high flush draw. Now, the only way he can win is if he hits a king or a queen. There are only 6 of those in the entire deck. And then on the next card, it has to come no heart and no ace for him to win. So you can see how you have him completely crippled. So against both of these hands, this hand plays great. But against both of these hands, the 6-high flush draw does not play that well. If he makes the bet with the 2 jacks and now you put the big testing raise with the 6-high flush draw on him, the only way you can win pretty much is by hitting your flush, and you're only going to do that about a third of the time. So there's a big difference between winning half the pots and only a third of the pots. And then, of course, in the opposite disaster scenario, here you are, you thought you were semi-bluffing with a flush draw, but you run into the king-queen of hearts, and now the situation is reversed. The only way you can win is if it comes a 6 or a 5, and then not a heart, a king, or a queen. So very, very unlikely for you to win the pot if you run into a hand like this. So again, I want you betting at a lot of flops and trying to pick them up, but when it comes time to really committing large portions of your stack, I really want you to be much more willing to do that with a hand like an ace-high flush draw as opposed to a small flush draw. You can really get in trouble with these small flush draws. Okay, we're now going to look at a basic situation that comes up quite often in No Limit Hold'em. And this is all going to relate to mixing up your play and becoming a dangerous, unpredictable player. And I see way too many intermediate players who will, defend their big blind with a hand like ace-10. Let's say someone has raised in middle or late position, and now they decide to defend their big blind with the ace-10. Which is certainly fine in a lot of situations, but now they catch a great flop, like ace-7-6, and now they're really anxious. They're worried. They don't want to give their opponent a free card. Now we've already looked at flops like this. I would consider this flop to be pretty dry in texture. If you have flopped the best hand, it's likely to stay that way. But you also have to look at the big picture. Yes, you flopped an ace. Yes, betting isn't a particularly bad thing. But if you look at the overall pattern of your betting, if when you have a hand like ace-10 and the flop comes an ace and you bet, but if the flop were to come something like this and you check every time that you miss, you're going to become very easy to play against. When you check, your opponent's just going to know, well, it's free lunch. Whatever money's in the pot is his, and he can just bet and take the money. And now, when you bet a hand like ace-10 into this flop, now all of a sudden your opponent knows that you've probably flopped something pretty good, and now he can make lots of very easy judgment decisions. If he has a hand like ace-king, well, he knows that you probably hit something, but it's not likely that you were playing ace-7 or ace-6. So he almost certainly has the best hand. But if he has a hand like a pair of queens, well, he obviously, if you're the kind of player that's going to bet out when you flop a pair of aces every time, he knows that his queens probably are no good. Now, he might give you a call on the flop, but now when you bet on the next card, he's going to be pretty sure that he's beat. So he's not going to be losing money with a hand like queens, and he's going to be beating you for a big pot with a hand like ace-king. On the other hand, if you're the kind of player that when you flop a decent but not great hand like this, you're willing to check on the flop, well, now you're going to get him to bet a lot of hands. You're going to get him to bet hands like queens. You're also going to get him to bet hands like king-jack when he's completely missed, because you've checked, and now he's thinking, well, you probably don't have an ace, so if he bets here, he might just pick up the pot. So you might start earning real chips against a hand that really has no chance to beat you. If you lead out with a hand like ace-10 and your opponent has king-jack, he's just going to fold, and you're going to win the pot. But if you check and you let him bluff at it, and now you raise or you call, you have him basically drawing dead. And this is how you earn those extra chips. It's over the long run that checking and calling or checking and raising, depending on the situation with hands like this, over the long run, it's going to make you a lot more money. It's going to make you unpredictable. It's going to make your opponent much less likely to bluff at you. And it's going to earn you extra dollars in the pots where you do flop the best hand. Okay, we're now going to look at an actual hand that I played at a WPT event in Foxwoods earlier this year. And I'm going to show you how you can really use the flop and use your betting strategies to really maximize your gain of information and to avoid dangerous situations in No Limit Hold'em. And this hand occurred, I believe it was during the second hour of the Foxwoods tournament, and the blinds at that point were 50 and 100. And we were playing at a full table, but it came around to a player who was in middle position, and he opened the pot for 300. And I had been watching this player play. I hadn't ever played with him before, but I'd been watching him play, and he was a very loose player. So I really didn't put a whole lot of weight on him having a very good hand. It came around to me, and I was the dealer, and I had ace-queen. And I was almost certain that I had the best hand. Now, of course, even a loose player can pick up a hand like aces or ace-king, but in this particular situation, I was fairly confident that he did not have a great hand. And I raised him, and I made it $1,000 total. And you'll notice that's about a pot-sized bet. I called his 3, and there were some antes in there, and I raised about the pot. I raised about 700 more, and I made it 1,000. And I was fully expecting to win the pot at this point. I didn't think he'd be able to call my raise. But even if he did call, I figured I'd have him beat, and I would be willing to play the pot in position with what I figured to be the best hand. Well, there was a little fly in the ointment, and a young player who had been playing pretty well, but also had been playing very solidly, called the raise from the blinds. He thought about it for a while. He wasn't thrilled with having to call, but he did call. And these white chips are $500 chips. The blacks are hundreds. So he called his 1,000. And I immediately put him on a pretty strong hand. Someone opening, and then another player coming over the top. For someone to call a raise like that, you can already put him on a pretty good-sized pair or a hand like ace-king. I really didn't think he'd have a hand like ace-queen or ace-jack. So I'm always thinking, I'm always trying to put my opponent on a hand. And also, as I had predicted, this player did not have a strong hand, and he did fold. So now the flop came, and this is a very key flop concept came up here. Now, this was a very good flop for my hand. I've got ace-queen, and I don't really think that my opponent has aces or kings, because if he had a hand that strong, he probably would have raised me back. He might have put in another 2,000 or 3,000 before the flop, at which point I would have folded and lost my 1,000. But my opponent did a curious thing, and this is also going to highlight the concept of not giving away too much information, and also being willing to check when you flop a good hand out of position. What happened was my opponent bet $1,200 into the pot. And now I started thinking about the kinds of hands he might have. Well, I thought, well, maybe he has the same hand, an ace-queen, although I really didn't put him on an ace-queen. I was also thinking maybe he thought I had ace-king, and now he was taking a stab at the pot. You know, there was about 2,500 in the pot. Maybe he's betting about half the pot with a pair of jacks or a pair of tens, just trying to pick it up, sort of against my ace-king, just sort of trying to make me fold a similar hand. Or maybe he has tens, he's hoping I have jacks, and I'm just going to fold if he bets here. So I thought there was a reasonable chance that I still had the best hand. But we are playing in a tournament, and he had more chips than me, and I had about 10,000 in chips going into this hand, which is what we had started with. I had broken about even so far. And here I thought was a golden opportunity for me to gain maximum advantage on the flop. And what I did was I raised him the minimum. So I committed 2,400 of my chips to sort of put him back to the test. And now it came back to him, and he didn't think about it too long, and he moved all his chips into the pot. And given what I had observed so far, I was almost certain that I was up against a set, and I threw my hand away. And he actually did turn up his cards, and he showed me that he had 3 nines. This is one of these situations where you need to think about what your opponent might have and think about the best way to proceed. Well, certainly I could have just thrown my hand away, I guess, when he bet the 1,200, but I mean, there's 2,500 in the pot, and it's kind of hard to be throwing it away. And I certainly considered calling. But the problem with calling is, what have you learned? If you're beat, you are unlikely to draw out. So if I had just called, and now the next card had come something like this, and now he bets like 3,000, I'm really in the same situation that I was in on the flop. I don't know whether I have the best hand, and now all of a sudden I'm looking at a $3,000 bet. I'm either going to have to make an uncomfortable fold, or I'm going to have to make an uncomfortable call, and all of a sudden my entire stack is in jeopardy. By making that informational raise on the flop, and this is a play that I really want you to start thinking about some good times to start